and my dear young colleagues. It gives me indeed very great pleasure to be in your midst this morning. It is always exciting to have an interaction with young minds and young people. It is heartening to note that within a period of 2 decades, this college, Kristu Jayanti College, has made a remarkable progress. I want to take this occasion to congratulate the management, the mission for the extraordinary work that they have done, and you must all be pleased to be part of such a distinguished college. The future of India rests on the youth of today. What India becomes tomorrow rests on your shoulders, on your hard work, on your knowledge, on your dedication and commitment. You are fortunate to be studying in a college which has provided you with an excellent intellectual environment. Please make the best use of it. Youth is full of idealism and ambition. Idealism without ambition may not achieve much. On the other hand, ambition without idealism is dangerous. I do hope you will combine the two in the right proportion. Let me once again express my great happiness in being able to meet you all this morning. I thought I will take the opportunity that has been given to me this morning to say a few words on the current economic scene and thereafter answer the questions that you may have in your mind. India underwent a dramatic change in 1991. The country faced an acute economic crisis triggered by a severe balance of payments problem. However, the policymakers converted the crisis into an opportunity to bring about some fundamental changes in India's economic policy. In the early decades after Indian independence, the dominant thinking in the literature on development economics was that the state, that is the government, had an important role to play and that it must undertake activities to correct what came to be known as market failures. The term market failure essentially means the inability of the markets to function properly and adequately. We know what the purpose of a market is. It is a market mechanism in capitalism which decides what is being produced in the country, in the economy, how it is produced, and to whom it is produced. It is a market which in a sense determines or allocates the resources within the system. But it was felt in the 1950s and 1960s that the markets will not be able to function effectively in developing economies, and therefore the state must step in and perform a very important role in economic activity. 50 to 60 years of development experience has shown that there can be government failure as well. That there could be inappropriate investment decisions made by the government as well. And therefore the current thinking is that the state has an important role to play, but that role must be confined to playing the role of a regulator in the system, playing the role of providing public goods and services to the society, but leave the markets to function, particularly in the production and distribution of goods and services which are easily marketable. The new economic policy builds on this premise. There is a common thread running through the various measures that have been introduced since 1991. And that is to improve the productivity and efficiency of the system by injecting a greater element of competition in the system. The new economic policy dismantles the huge network of controls and permits and quotas which existed prior to 1991. Therefore, the objective was to improve the efficiency of the system by making the system more competitive. Some of the areas which were exclusively reserved for the government earlier were also now thrown open to the private sector. Classic examples are power, aviation, steel, and so on. In some of these areas, the state or the government may still play a major part, but it will have to compete with the private sector entities which have been permitted. We can see this very clearly in aviation. At one time, the Indian Airlines or Air India had the exclusive privilege to run the airlines in our country. But today there are many, many airlines which have been permitted. The Indian Airlines or Air India is still a major airline in the system, but nevertheless it has to compete with others. But I must also point out at this juncture that there is nothing in the new economic policy which takes away the role of the state or public enterprise. The new economic policy has not necessarily diminished the role of the state. It has reduced its role in some areas, but it has expanded its role in certain other areas. In the fields of public health, public education, more particularly primary health and primary education, the state has an important role to play. As I mentioned earlier, the state in an economy can play three important roles. One, as a provider of marketable goods and services. Two, as a regulator. Three, as a provider of public goods and services. As a result of the new economic policy, the role of the state as a provider of marketable goods and services is coming down. We are not setting up new steel plants. We are not setting up an automobile, the government is not setting up an automobile factory. So its role in the provision of marketable goods and services is coming down. But simultaneously, the role of the state as a regulator, as a provider of public goods and services. What do I mean by public goods? Public goods are the commodities or services which are useful to the public in general. So whether it is the provision, as I mentioned earlier, of public health or public education, or similar related services, the role of the state continues to remain important. India's economic growth was very slow in the first 4 decades after India's independence. The average annual rate of growth of the Indian economy up to 1980 was only 3.5%. Since at that time, population was growing at 2% per annum, the per capita income, that is the income per person, was growing only at 1.5%. In the 80s, the growth rate picked up. But we see a dramatic change since the beginning of 1991. In the period prior to the introduction of the reforms, the Indian economy grew between 1981, 82 and 1991 at an average rate of 5.6% per annum. In the period since 92-93 to 2009-10, the growth rate has been 6.8%. In fact, if you come to the more recent period, the economic growth in the 6-year period beginning 2005-6 to 2010-11, the average rate of growth has been 8.6%, and the per capita income has been growing at 7%. There is no doubt that the Indian economy has moved on to a higher trajectory of economic growth. The direction in which we are moving has been vindicated by the performance of the Indian economy. After having grown at a rate exceeding 9% per annum for 3 consecutive years, beginning 2005-06, India grew at 6.7% in 2008-09. This was because of the international financial crisis. As you are all aware, there was a collapse of the financial system in the advanced countries in 2008. And as a consequence of the near collapse of the financial system, these countries were caught in a severe recession. Some people regard the recession as the most severe one since the depression of the 1930s. And this had an impact on the rest of the world. As a consequence, the Indian economy grew at 6.7% in 2008-09. But in the following year, 2009-10, the economy recovered and grew at 8%. In 2010-11, the economy grew at 8.5%. I must say the growth rate of 8% in 2009-10 is a very good performance because that was a year in which India was hit by a drought and there was negligible agricultural production. Therefore, the 8% growth rate in 2009-10 was contributed because of the very rapid growth in industry and services. In 2010-11, as I mentioned, the economy grew at 8.5%, agriculture grew strongly at 6.6%, manufacturing at 8.3%, and services at 9.4%. What about the current year? There have been some concerns about the performance of the Indian economy in the current year. Broadly speaking, we can divide the economy into 3 sectors. One is agriculture, the other is industry, and the third is services. Now, in India's economy, services contribute more than 50% of the total national income. In the current year, agriculture will do well. We had a good monsoon, and farmers are expected to take full advantage of the good monsoon. We grew at 6.6%, or agriculture grew at 6.6% last year. But this year, we might still see agriculture growing at 3 to 3.5% on top of the strong growth of last year. Services will continue to grow strongly this year also. But it is with respect to industrial production, there are some concerns. The industrial production in the first quarter of the current year, that is April, May, June, was good. But the industrial production started declining, the growth rate started declining in the second quarter, that is July, August and September. And the October numbers have been very depressing. The October numbers indicate a decline or a negative growth rate of 5.1%. Now there are many factors which might have contributed to the decline in the growth rate in industrial production. We have had high inflation for the last 2 years. That must have affected in some ways the growth rate of industry. Investment, particularly in infrastructure, has not been adequate. And thirdly, there is something to do with sentiment also. And the last year, the current year, let us say, has seen many turbulent events in the Indian polity, which must have also affected the sentiment as far as industry is concerned. It is my estimate that in the current year, the Indian economy will grow between 7 and 7.25%. This undoubtedly is a sharp decline from the 9% plus growth rate that we had seen for 3 years after 2005-06. But we have to recognize the external factors are not very hospitable. The advanced countries are have not still recovered. In fact, they are passing through a second crisis, particularly in Europe, which has been caused by the high level of government debt. And that is why the crisis through which Europe is passing is called the sovereign debt crisis. So taking all these factors into account, I would say that perhaps the Indian economy will grow between 7 and 7.25% in the current year. We must get back to the high rate of growth that we had seen earlier. It is imperative that we do that. It is in this context many people ask the question, what is the potential rate of growth of the Indian economy? Can Indian economy continue to grow in a sustained way at 9% per annum? Now, one way of answering the question is to look at the savings and investment rate. The savings rate of India in the last few years has been 34% of the GDP. The investment rate has been 36%. Now, even assuming an incremental capital output ratio of 4:1, this should enable the economy to grow at 9%. Some of you have studied development economics as part of your program would know that the growth rate of an economy is equal to the investment rate divided by the incremental capital output ratio. The incremental capital output ratio means the amount of capital required to produce 1 unit of output. So if you are putting 36% of your GDP in investment, then even assuming an incremental capital output ratio of 4:1, you can get a growth rate of 9. 36 divided by 4 will give you 9. Now it is not necessary that we will grow at 9%. I'm only saying that is a potential of the economy. We have the wherewithal and the capacity to grow at 9% per annum. But whether or not we will achieve that will depend upon a variety of other factors. It will depend, as I mentioned earlier, on what is happening in the rest of the world. It will also depend upon certain macroeconomic factors within the country. I may indicate a few things that may come in the way of our achieving the potential rate of growth of the economy. I have been talking about growth rate. Some people will say growth is not the only criterion for judging the performance of the economy. It is equally important to know who benefits from growth. Which sections of the community have actually benefited because of the growth performance. In India, we talk about the poverty line. We talk about the number of people below the poverty line. We had a way of estimating what the poverty line is. Originally, the poverty line was defined in terms of the expenditure required to achieve or to get certain amount of calories in the rural and the urban areas. Based on this principle, the Laklawala committee, of which I was a member, outlined a methodology for estimating the people below the poverty line. And using this methodology, the Planning Commission had estimated in 1993-94 that the number of people below the poverty line was 36% of the total population. Using the same methodology, it was computed in 2004-05, the number of people below the poverty line was 27.5%. There were some concerns about whether this actually reflects the reality. Professor Tendulkar, who is no more now, unfortunately, was asked to look into this issue very recently, about 2 years ago. And he re-estimated the poverty lines. And according to his methodology, the number of people below the poverty line in 93-94 was 45.3%, and it came down to 37.2% in 2004-05. Now there can be no agreement among all regarding what constitutes a poverty line. Different people have different perceptions regarding what constitutes the poverty line. But what is clear is that whatever methodology you adopt, that the period since 93-94 to 2004-05, during the period 93-94 to 2004-05, the number of people below poverty line has come down by 8 to 8.5 percentage points. This is true if you adopt the earlier Lakdawala methodology. This is also true if you have adopted Tendulkar methodology. But having said this, I must say that the number of people below poverty line is still very large. 25% or to 30% of a total population of 1.2 billion. It's a very large number, and therefore we still have a long way to go. But I do believe that in trying to find a solution to the problems of poverty, we need to grow fast. Growth is one answer to reducing the poverty in our country. We had also looked at whether there is a convergence among the states regarding the per capita income. The idea is that the poorer states or states with lower income should grow faster than the other states so that there can be a convergence. Our analysis indicates that the median growth rate has definitely increased from the earlier period to the more recent period. Following the period 93-94 to 99-2000, the growth rate was 3.9%. And from 99-2000 to 2008-9, the median growth rate is 5.7%. Therefore, there is a definite lift as far as the growth rates among the various states are concerned. But nevertheless, there is no convergence because that some of the richer states have also been growing at a faster rate or at a rate as fast as some of the poorer states. Therefore, there is no convergence happening, even though there is a clear indication that some of the poorer states like UP, Bihar, Assam and Orissa are growing at a faster rate. Now let me broadly indicate some of the macroeconomic concerns that we might have in terms of achieving the potential rate of the growth of the economy. I will not elaborate on them, I will only indicate to them. I've already taken about half an hour. Let me have a little time for interacting with you. So let me purely indicate. There are three major macroeconomic concerns. One is to tame inflation. We have had high level of inflation for the last 2 years, and it is imperative that we bring it down as fast as possible. There are indications that the inflation is coming down, but we need to take whatever action that is required, whether it be monetary policy or fiscal policy or intervention in the food grain market. All these are instruments that are available. We need to bring inflation down. 2, we must maintain the current account deficit at a level where capital flows will be adequate to cover the current account deficit. We should aim at, in the near term, to ensure that the current account deficit is no more than 2.5% of the GDP. And the third macroeconomic concern is fiscal consolidation. I think it is extremely important that we maintain the fiscal deficit at a reasonably low level. So the three major macroeconomic concerns are taming inflation, containing the current account deficit at a reasonable level, and ensuring fiscal consolidation. In terms of sectoral concerns, I have two. One is agriculture and the other is infrastructure. The last 2 years has clearly shown how even a small decline in agricultural production can have adverse impact or can cause distortions in the economy. It is extremely important that we achieve a respectable rate of growth in agriculture and allied activities year after year. Growth in agriculture is imperative or important because for various reasons, for ensuring food security, for balanced regional development, and for reducing poverty. The other major sectoral concern relates to the infrastructure sector and more particularly power. It is very important that the generation of power and capacity creation in the power sector go according to the develop according to the targeted levels. You in Karnataka need not be told about what the power constraint, what the power shortage can do. Therefore, there are many states, including Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Andhra, and others, who have a serious shortfall in terms of the availability of power. Unless power is available in plenty, it will come in the way of faster rate of growth of industrial production. So what needs to be done has been analyzed by various committees. We should see that for power to develop or to grow at the targeted level, coal availability must improve. We need to resolve the problems regarding land acquisition. We need to resolve some of the environmental concerns which have been raised in terms of adding more capacity in the power sector. So these are some of the important concerns, but as I mentioned earlier, India has the capacity to grow at 9% per annum. The aim of policy making should be to achieve this level of growth. In fact, if India grows at 8% per annum, by 2025, India's per capita GDP will grow from the current level of $1,600 to $8,000 to $10,000. And then India will migrate from being a low-income country to a middle-income country. That, I think, must be the most important objective before us. At this stage of our development, growth is extremely important. Growth must necessarily be inclusive. Growth must take care of environmental concerns. But at the same time, to grow, it must be growing at a rate which is respectable is also equally important. Equity cannot be brushed aside. Equity is critically important. But growth and equity need not be posed as opposing considerations. Growth and equity must be weaved together to produce a coherent pattern of development. Therein lies the statesmanship of this country. Thank you very much.